about the well-being of your church. And we just say again today, Jesus, you are head of your church, and we pray that everything that's done here at Access this year would be done in a God-honouring and a people-honouring way. We pray that all for Jesus, in his name. Amen. Thanks, Jeff. Why don't you give him a hand as he comes?
Thanks, Jono. And thank you for your enthusiastic introduction during the church service too. You've given me a lot to live up to. I just want to thank you for your ministry at Access Church. It's a great blessing that you have been willing to give up your time throughout the year for the ministry of the church, and certainly for coming here today. But I just wonder why you are actually here today. Is it because Paul Smith said to a group of people that it was going to be fun? Well, yes, I'm not quite sure how we'll go with that. Is it because somebody said to you, it is mandatory for you to attend the safety training? Who heard that? Oh, yes, a few people. And Jono also said during the service too that we actually do it because we love our people, we want to protect our people, we want to protect our ministry, and we want to protect ourselves. So that's also a valid reason. But it is mandatory. It is mandatory by external agencies require all groups to do training as part of their organisational sort of structure. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that we have a very diverse group even here today. There are some people here that deal with children. Who deals with children? There are some people that deal with big kids, as in adults. And there are some people here that probably don't deal with people at all. But you're volunteers within the church, and safety is important kind of thing for all of us. So we have that diversity. Just asking the question too, who's done some training in their secular employment already this year? If you look around the room, there's quite a few hands up within that. Who's done training at Access before today, this year? And you can see there's people within that. So training is a part of our life. Why do we have to keep on doing training all the time? Well, it's a little bit like an athlete. An athlete has to keep on training all the time to hone up their skills and to get their preparedness going. It also helps us to fine-tune in understanding and knowing exactly what we are doing and what we are required to do. But each year for our training, there are certain aspects that we have to get covered. And in our training topics, and this is decided not to advance, did then. In our training topics, we have to talk about child protection. I'd encourage you to think about it, even if you feel that you don't have anything to do with children. We all are a family, and we all are responsible for the people that are in our church, in the ministry here. So we all have a role in protecting children. We also have to do risk management. Again, one of the mandatory required topics. It's important that we understand what risk is and how to minimise risk. We also have workplace health and safety and regulations associated with that in terms of how we run things within the organisation. And finally, we need to make sure that you are aware of your expectations in relation to being a leader or a helper or a volunteer or a worker at Access Church. So let's just talk about where a lot of this kind of comes from. We have in the Wesleyan Methodist Church a book called the Handbook of the Wesleyan Methodist Church. That gets updated every 4 years. We also have something called Policies, Procedures in the Wesleyan Methodist Church that gets updated every year in June. We have also local church policies that guide what needs to happen here. And some examples of the local church policies, there's one called People Protection and Risk Management, and that's the one that Joe has sent you out. It will say Access People Protection and Risk Management. It's a local church policy. It's based on a template that's provided to all our churches in Australia, and then churches personalise it. But there certainly are quite a number of other policies that Access Church has in place. So in terms of the handbook, it's actually the constitution of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, and as such, of course, it talks about keeping people safe and keeping our ministries protected. We also, in the policies and procedures of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, that policy is the things that are mandated by both our denomination and by external agencies. And it also provides us with procedures which support implementation of the processes. Now, partly the reason for telling you about policies and procedures of the Wesley Methodist Church is that that's a document that's available for you to access. So if you'd like to access that document, Joe can send you a copy of that as well. In terms of the people protection and risk management, that policy helps us to prevent foreseeable harm to all our participants of church activities. It does have a focus on children, unashamedly has a focus on children because that's our more vulnerable sort of group. But it also has young people and older people who are vulnerable are covered within that policy as well. It also is to ensure that the people that we have working at Access Church or any of our churches throughout Australia are actually assessed for their suitability to be able to undertake that sort of ministry, to be able to work with children and under the principles that we'll talk about in terms of child-safe organisations. So we need to ensure that all people involved with the operation of the church and its ministries are aware of their responsibilities. And again, we have a legal obligation to let you know what your responsibilities are. So what is child protection? And if you can see on the screen up there in the top, hopefully that's able to be read reasonably, it's protection from harm. And harm is any detrimental effect of a significant nature on the physical, psychological or emotional well-being of a person. So it's not just the physical protection, it's a broader sense than that. So when a child or young person has suffered significant harm, is suffering significant harm or is at risk of significant harm? And I want you just to hear the pattern within that. We're talking about past, present and future in terms of the risk associated with harm. And if that person doesn't have a parent or a guardian or a carer who's able to protect them, then they're defined as being more at risk. These also just are not my words, they're part of the legal definition of what child protection is all about. In Queensland, we have child protection legislation, Child Protection Act, and we also have a department which looks after child protection within Queensland. Now, back a number of years, back in December 2017, there was a Royal Commission report. It was quite an extensive sort of report, and some of you will remember that there were things that were happening in child-centred organisations that were just absolutely disgraceful. And the commission was set up by the government to see what was happening in all sorts of organisations that catered for children, including churches. And the Royal Commission gave out its report. There was a volume 16 of that report, so if you want to read, it's a very long read, but if you wanted to read about what it means for churches, it's in volume 16. And what I've done is I've looked through volume 16 and taken out some of the headings associated with that are relevant for us. So you see child safe standards, which I mentioned before, and we'll be talking about that we need to provide training for people before you take up duty and after you've taken up duty. You need to know that there is support available, you need to be accountable, conflict of interest, self-protection strategies. This is teaching children to be self-protective in terms of that, to make sure that our policies are available for people to read, to be able to screen candidates, and you're the candidates as in candidates for leadership positions, and also to understand about governance and our annual performance appraisals, to conduct regular training, to conduct a code of conduct, and to have a complaint management process. And the final one is discipline, which is more in relation to if we had a paid person, like even pastors are subject to discipline if they breach the required regulations. So in summarising all these things that are part of the Royal Commission, it's about expectations, it's about training, it's about governance and accountability, it's about having appropriate people doing the task, and it's about running effective processes within our church, within our organisation. Thinking about what child abuse actually is. Child abuse, we often in our minds jump to thinking about it, well, it's physical abuse. Or we hear the terrible examples and we think, oh, well, it's also sexual abuse. But we need to remember that child abuse is defined as also being emotional abuse and neglect. You think in today's society, we wouldn't have to be worried about physical, sexual, emotional neglect. Well, you would hope or wish for that, but unfortunately, you might have seen in the news last week where there is a family of children that have been abused, very, very severely abused by their father. So abuse of all sorts is still prominent within or prevalent in our community, and we need to be looking out for it in the children that are in our care. So in the Child Safe Standards, there's 10 Child Safe Standards, and without going through all of them individually, it's some of the things that, excuse me, I've already been talking about, but just stopping on number 8 there, just emphasising the fact that the online environment is increasingly becoming a problem in terms of safety and the protection of our children. If you see in the bottom right-hand corner, it's got P, P and RM on page 3. So if you have your people protection and risk management document there, could you just flick to page 3? And I just want to point out to you that that's where the child standards are actually listed for you. So if you need to reflect on those further down the track, they're there. In terms of that, we have internal policies and we have external policies that cover keeping children safe. But the document today that we're really focusing our training on is to do with people protection and risk management. Just some very specific things related to implementing this is the implementation of managing a disclosure. So if a person comes to you and says, "Can I tell you something, but I don't want you to tell anyone else?" Now there's a different response that you need to take if they are a child. And you need to understand that a 17-year-old is defined as a child. They'll probably be offended if we tell them that they're children, but under the law, anyone under 18 is defined as a child, and once you turn 18, you become an adult. So if a person who is 18 comes and says that to you, then we would be encouraging them to take their complaint forward or take the information forward to the police. Whereas if a person is under 18, you need to know what your response has to be to that particular person saying, "I don't want you to tell anyone." The first thing is that you need to advise them that if they report it to you, then you are obliged under law to take it further. You can't keep a secret if they are telling you that something unlawful has happened to them. In terms of responding, you have to be careful not to react in a shocked or a critical way to the child. You need to provide support. And you might say to the child, "Well, you're very brave to be coming and talking to me about this, and I'm going to help you as much as I possibly can and support you." You need to have your discussion with the child in a confidential place. Now, a confidential place is not a private place. A confidential place might be, for example, over in one corner of the church here, and you find a quiet spot kind of thing there. It's not in a locked office with just you and the child within that. So not a private, or not a private place. It needs to be a public place, but a confidential place. You need to make a written summary of what the child tells you to do or tells you has happened. It's very, very important to use the words that the child has used or the person has used in terms of their report. The first step to do is to be advising the pastor that you've had this disclosure, and the pastor will take it forward from there. But the important thing is to make that written summary and to not be probing or not be extending the child or telling them how they should be feeling. So telling a person, "You must feel absolutely devastated as a result of that and ashamed of yourself," or shamed or whatever, you could actually be making it worse. And if there goes on to an investigation involving the police, you're actually corrupting the evidence by doing that. So you don't probe in terms of asking deep questions. You might ask some open-ended questions, but you certainly don't put the words into their mouth. So part of the responsibility of us as a church is that we are, in fact, mandatory reporters. A few years back, churches were not mandatory reporters, so we actually had a bit of leeway to decide whether or what we were going to do with the information that's provided. But now we are mandatory reporters, which means that if the message is not passed on, to the appropriate authorities, we've actually broken the law by not reporting it on. So churches are mandatory reporters report to child safety if they form a reasonable suspicion that a child has suffered, is suffering, or is an unacceptable risk of suffering significant harm caused by physical or sexual abuse, and may not have a parent able to or willing to protect them. You notice again, it's the past, the present and the future that comes into that legal clause there in terms of being a mandatory reporter. And then secondly, the senior pastor receives that written report from you. We prefer that to be received within 24 hours, and that the senior pastor then will take on the appropriate response to that and contact the appropriate authority related to that. One of the things that we do to make sure that we are doing appropriate screening is have the code of conduct that you've got with you at the moment. You also were sent a copy of that. I need to apologise, is that there's a new updated version of the Code of Conduct which is more inclusive, and it came out to churches a couple of weeks ago, but I failed to really push that to Joe that I wanted the latest version sort of sent out. So some of you may have one that is very much child focused, and if you have the version that's very much child focused, it really is just a matter of saying child and people, adding and people, just to extend it to other people as well, and it does it just as well. Now, one of the things that it says in the Code of Conduct is that I agree to abide by this Code of Conduct during my service within the church. I will advise the pastor if I fail to comply or can no longer abide by this commitment. Now, why we put this in is that we're working with people that we love and we trust, but you know yourself when you are no longer eligible for one reason or another. We mightn't pick it up straight away by having your blue card withdrawn if you've committed an offence and got to that sort of stage. There's a lag sort of time. So what we're doing is, as a church, saying you have an obligation to let us know if you now know that you are no longer suited to be taking up a ministry within the church. And then understanding that breaches of the Code of Conduct may lead to church discipline and, in fact, termination. Termination sounds drastic, doesn't it? But we're often talking about this, and this is used for pastors, all people that are employed within the church, as well as our volunteers. And termination just simply means stood aside or stand down from the position within that. All right, in our time, we need to get through this fairly rapidly, but we're in a bit of a transition now between talking about child protection and going on talking a little bit more about risk management. And as Isaac had a little competition for you, I have one too. These are the instructions. You are to read the sentence that's going to appear on the screen in just a moment, and you are to count the number of times that the letter F appears. So count the number of times that the letter F appears. If you have a pencil or a pen, it'd be nice if you just scribble that down on your piece of paper. Now, I'm asking you not to share your response with anybody else until we actually come back and check how we've kind of gone within that. So the number of times the letter F appears in the statement that's coming up. Now, this is a time-sensitive task. You only have about 5 seconds to do it. Are you ready? Are you ready? Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put your answer down. If you haven't got a pen, you have to memorise what your answer is. Okay, let's see how we went. Who thought there was one F? Hand up. Who thought there was 2 Fs? Who thought there were 3 Fs? Yes, quite a few, about a third of the room. Who thought there were 4 Fs? Yes, a few more. Who thought there was 5 Fs? Hand down. Who thought there was 6 Fs? Who thought there was 7 Fs? Now here is a very simple task with some very simple instructions. And we're going to have some simple instructions in terms of safety. So how come we can get people with 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7? Did anyone have 8? No, no 8s. Okay. So how could a simple task like choose the number of F's in that passage end up with so many different interpretations of it? So here it is. There's one. Everyone got finished? Yes, say yes. You got files? Did you get scientific? So there's your three. So the answer is 3, isn't it? No. Because there's of, F, there's of there, and there's of there. So there is in fact 6 F's in the passage. Now, why do we get such a diverse number of answers in terms of that? There's only one right answer, and that's 6. But why do we get such a diverse range of answers? And the reason for that is that you interpret the instructions a little bit differently. I said to read the paragraph and find out how many F's there are in it. Very straightforward. But some people read the paragraph and said, it doesn't make sense. Who thought it didn't make sense? Look, you didn't bother to read it then, did you? It doesn't make sense. It's not really a sensible sort of paragraph in terms of that. The sentence doesn't make a lot of sense within that. Other people are very much auditory people. So when I said F's, they were looking for F, finished, F, files, F for scientific. But what does of say? Come on, teachers. It says the. It doesn't say F at all. So the auditory people have trouble with picking up the fact that there's an F there that doesn't say F, it says the, and getting a different answer. But the answer is 6. There are the 6 that within it. And the point of doing that, because Isaac says we have to have a point in playing these games, the point in doing this is that we need to look at the instructions carefully. We need to look at the requirements carefully and see how it applies within our particular environment, follow it through. Now, I want to revamp on what we did last year. I've done the safety training for a couple of years here now at church. Last year, we talked about safety as being para. Now, I don't expect you to remember that, but para is a prefix, and it occurs in words such as parachute, paraprofessional. Any other para words you can think of? Okay, lots of different para words, and it has some different meanings within that. When we say parachute, it's to stop you or keep you safe from hitting the ground too hard, isn't it? And a paraprofessional is a person who comes alongside, like a paramedic, comes alongside a doctor or other medical providers and provides a service within that. So it comes alongside. If we use things like paranormal, it's sort of way out there and different, but it comes alongside of what is actually normal. So lots of different meanings for para. If it was paramount, it means of significance and importance. And I want to tell you that safety is a range of those things, and that's why para works well. We also use para as an acronym, and para is a place or a person. So we want Access to be a safe place. We want people of Access to be safe people. People that can feel confident about coming to you, people that can feel confident about coming to Access Church as a safe place. We need to be perceived as a safe place. Why is this so important? If we go back to the Royal Commission time, soon after the Royal Commission, churches had the reputation of being unsafe places. And the brush was tarred against all churches because some religious organisations had not been safe places. So we need to be a safe place. Safety is an attitude, is a standard or is a value. And as Jono sort of said, we need to recognise that we're doing this safety today because we actually love doing our job. We love looking after our people. We love seeing them spiritually grow. And we need to take the attitude that we are wanting to protect our people. The next one is that safety is our responsibility. It is just part of our role. It's in your position description. If you haven't got one, well, it's in your imaginary position description. But it's a responsibility. It's a requirement. It's part of your role. And finally, safety is an attribute or a quality. And we have safety signs, for example, down on the wall there. We have safety programs within the church. We have safety routes and safety policies and whatever. But we also have things like a safety vest, you've seen probably, so it can be a piece of equipment. So there's a whole range of things that safety is, but it was trying to get people to remember that safety is para because it's a range of different things. It's not the main thing that we do at church, obviously, but it's a foundational thing that we need to do. So safety is a situation in which, mine's really small, in which it's also a place where you feel protected from harm. I'll decrease that again. So one of the things that we do in terms of understanding and protecting ourselves and protecting our ministry and protecting our church and protecting the people that we look after is do risk management. And risk management, as it says there, is part of a decision-making process. It's a common life process. I wonder if you recognise the fact that you make thousands of decisions every day. It's been estimated that an adult will make anything up to 35,000 decisions in a day. Do you do a risk assessment for every time you make up a decision? Well, no. You've got an experiential sort of background that will tell you just to hop in and do something. But there's a lot of times when you're facing a new or a novel situation that you do actually need to do a risk assessment. When you were driving to church today, do I overtake the car in front of me or do I not? Do I go at 70 kilometres an hour because I'm a little bit late, or do I stick to the speed limit at 60? They're all risk assessments that you're kind of making at that particular point in time. So the first thing that you do in a risk assessment is that you need to clarify what the event is. You need to have a think through, well, what are we actually doing? And the second part is where we're doing it. Can you understand that a risk is greater if you're doing it outside this building here than inside the building? Can you realise that it's a greater risk if we're doing it down the street or if we go on a longer excursion out into the bush? So the risk level varies depending upon where we actually are and the activity. What is the activity we're going to do? Is it going to be a very physical sort of activity or not? So that they make a difference. There are contributing factors to the degree of risk. There's a whole range of contributing factors, including the age of the people that you're dealing with, the experience of those people. You have to consider what are the potential harmful consequences. If there was an accident, is it that extreme that somebody could be fatally injured? Or is it just that they might need a Band-Aid? So we do the potential harmful consequences. We then have a look at what is the likelihood. How likely is it that there will be an injury kind of occurring? Very recently, as in just last week, you probably heard on the news, we're now 90 seconds to midnight. Did anyone hear that? Only me. Oh, a couple of people did. 90 seconds to midnight, just very briefly, means that the scientists of the world have this clock. And it's obviously a theoretical sort of concept which just says how close is the world getting to being colloquially stuffed in terms of, something's going to go horribly wrong in the world. And the clock has just been moved 10 seconds closer to midnight. So it's a measure of the likelihood. What is the likelihood of injury and harm? And our scientists are saying we've just moved closer to that. Can you think of the world events that have made them say that? Climate change, yes. Anything else? So, the war in Ukraine. So there are events, catastrophic events like that are happening in the world, and they're saying we're now the likelihood of harm or injury has been increased because of that. We have to then do within our risk assessment a measure of the risk level, and there's a process whereby you get a score of that and decide whether it is acceptable to proceed. So you might do a risk assessment on an event, especially if you're Isaac, and you might decide that as a result of doing that, you can't proceed with that event because the risk is just simply too high. But part of the process also is to look at how can I actually minimise the risk? How can I minimise the risk? What can I do that will stop the harm or the extent of the harm. And you need to have a response strategy. So again, if you're going outside of the church building here, do you know that we have a first aid kit that you can take with you within that? So that's just one way of having a response strategy. Another thing to, I guess, think about, if you're going an extended distance away from it, so you're away from civilization, you're away from the nearest hospital or the doctor or whatever, then part of your risk assessment will say, we're going on a camp, we're going to be in a remote area, we need to take somebody with us who has first aid credentials within that. So that's part of your response strategies within that. So risk management is simply a process for promoting safety within your ministry. I just thought that I'd give you an example of a risk assessment just to show that it doesn't have to be a hard thing to actually do. So here is a risk assessment, and it's for a group that Tina and I have just started up last Friday. So very, very simply, I just called it the Baywater Growth Group. We started on the 27th of January, and we're going to be meeting weekly onwards. Has it been approved by the pastor? That's an important step. You need to know that it's been approved. Is it permitted under public liability policy? There are certain things that you just simply cannot do because it's not covered in our insurance policy without taking extra steps within that. It then says who are the participants, and it says it's going to be mostly adults attending, and our purpose is spiritual development. The description is it's a home group meeting at Baywater and other members' homes. The risks are food safety because we have morning tea with it. There is some risk of personal injury for a person tripping over, etc. We need to have people knowing how to access the apartment, and the emergency evacuation. As I just said, I'm in an apartment, so we're in a block, and if there was an emergency and the lift wasn't working, then the people that come to visit us need to know how can they get out of the apartment. We need to be aware of the fact that the participants are adults rather than children, so that's different in terms of how we follow that through. There may be some with mobility issues, but children are unlikely to be there. We then do a quantification of the risk. We quantify the risk, and it comes up that the impact or consequence is minor. So if somebody was to have an accident at our home group, it's unlikely that they will be fatally wounded. The likelihood of it to occur is also low. So the risk level then is a combination of those two scores. So you get a level 2. Now notice that there's no such thing as a level 1 or level 0, because part of risk management is you cannot completely remove the risk. You cannot completely remove the fact that there could be an accident. But this is at the lowest risk level, being level 2, and therefore as a result of that, the meeting can proceed, that this is an activity that can progress. So how are we going to minimise the risk? Well, we're going to have an induction at the initial meeting, and when new attendees come in, there will be induction within that. We're going to use the group guidelines that Jono kindly provided for groups, and we have somebody who is food safe trained going to be attending. And we're going to continue to ongoing review and enhancement of the group processes to maintain safety and effectiveness. So as you can see from that, that's not very complicated, is it? It's not hard to come up with a risk assessment and say that the activity that we're going to do within our home group is going to be okay and safe. You see the top of the screen now, it says that there are 2 types of risk assessments. There's that very simple generic description of an assessment of risk. The second type is if our home group suddenly decides one day, let's go out next week and do rock climbing. And if you knew our group, that would be funny. Or we're going to do some water sports, or we're going to do something else like that that's vastly different from what's in the risk assessment. You need to do a separate risk assessment for every particular event that kind of occurs. So we have a generic risk assessment, if you like, and then we have a very specific risk assessment for a particular event. And say, for example, you know, the community events that we've had here, we would have a risk assessment done for those particular events, because It's more than just the general risk assessment for being safe at Access Church. So, pressing on, in our safety focus and safety preparation, part of risk management is being prepared for safety. But surprisingly, this is a little bit like we just heard in the sermon today. When trials, dangers and problems are upon you, what do you do when you're skiing down the slope? Do you look at the trees or do you look at the pathway? And it's that exact message. If you're in a situation in your ministry and there's a crisis occurring or about to occur, you need to be aware of that crisis, but you also need to be looking for, how do I get past this? Unfortunately, in emergency sort of situations, often the response, maybe the human response, is to freeze up. That people will freeze up. There's an emergency happening and people just stand around and look. So someone's lying on the ground and a little group of people will gather around them just watching them, but no one is stepping up to do anything about it. So don't be fixated on the impending disaster. Look for the solution. Look to a solution. Now, this is whether you're driving a car or someone's been injured or whatever. If there's an accident about to happen, if you look at the accident happening, as Isaac said, you're aiming for the trees. Don't aim for the trees, aim for the pathway. Once you do look carefully at this expression here, it says that skills plus competence, but God's grace and power is the way that we move forward. And perhaps in this, if we look in the top corner, it says for a safety emergency, you need to have skillful and competent action, and you need to also be decisive in terms of what you do. So if you can read that again. For a safety emergency, we need to be skillful and competent. That's the action that is needed. We need to be decisive. And just prompted me to think about maybe to make sure we understand what skills and competence and decisive action mean. So just let me preface on that for a moment. A skill is something like, I learned how to swim. Can everyone here swim? Hand up if you can swim. Good, very good. So if you wanted to be an athlete for swimming, you would practice that over time, wouldn't you? And keep your skill level up, keep your ability, your skillful ability up within that. So that's what a skill is, something that you can practice and get better at over time. A competence is being able to put into place something like a skill and to get a successful outcome. So if I can swim and I get caught in a rip, how do I get out of the rip? Somebody knows, one person knows, you don't swim back to the beach. Do you know that? You don't swim back to the beach, you swim parallel to the beach. So a competence is knowing I'm not going to swim back to the beach because I'm just going to exhaust myself. I swim parallel to the beach, get myself excuse me, out of the rip, and then I go back to the beach level. Giving you another example, if you know how to defrost food, do you know how to defrost food? Well, if in your ministerial group, what you have to try to do is defrost the food without the food getting above 5 degrees. Because as soon as it gets up above 5 degrees, there are all sorts of rules associated with how that needs to be kind of managed. So we could say the skill is knowing about how to defrost food, or knowing the skill is how to cook food. But the competency is being able to implement that so I don't give food poisoning to the people that are in my home. And if you do the food safety course, you'll learn that if you take food out and out of the freezer, there's a 2-hour window where you can put it back into the fridge again. There's also a 4-hour window whereby you can continue serving up that food, and the likelihood of giving someone food poisoning is probably limited within that. But these are obviously just very rough figures. And then is the last 2 hours. And if your food stays out for longer than that period of time, it has to be discarded. It shouldn't be reused again because the bacterial probability of poisoning people as a result of that. So that's the competence. Knowing all that on how to actually manage the food is the competence. Knowing the basic sort of things about how to cook and how to defreeze things could be seen as a skill. Just another one, because it just prompted to mind. Many years ago, I worked for Education Queensland, and I was a quality assurance officer, and I needed to go out and visit all the schools. So as a result of that, they very kindly sent me to a defensive driving course. And if you've ever been to a defensive driving course, it's a lot of fun. They give you these near new cars, they put you on a wet, flat surface, and you're allowed to spin the car around and do all sorts of things. So lots and lots of fun. But one of the things that we learnt at that training session is something called cadence braking. And in cadence braking, rather than just jamming your foot on the accelerator, in cadence braking, you pump the brakes. The reason you pump the brakes is that it allows you still to steer the car. When the brakes are locked on, you can't steer the car. It'll just keep on going in the momentum in the direction. Even if you have it trying to turn it a different way, it'll keep on just going whichever way it wants to go within that. Now that skill of knowing how to do cadence braking is now obsolete, because modern day cars, when you put your foot on the brake and jam it on the brake, it does the cadence braking for you. Now if you've ever, don't go try this on the way home necessarily, but if you're going and have to pull up in a hurry and jam your foot on the brake of a modern car, you'll notice that there's a shuddering. Anyone ever notice the shuddering or remember that there's a shuddering that kind of occurs? No, you're all wonderful drivers and never drive that fast that you need the brake so easily. But there's a shuddering that kind of occurs, and that's the cadence braking coming in. It's brake on, brake off, brake on, brake off, brake on, brake off. And the reason your car does that is to enable you to be able to steer and to be able to direct out. So going back to snowing down the slopes and missing the trees, if you're in your car, it enables you to steer away from the impending disaster that's kind of coming to you. Whereas if you jammed your foot on the brake, then you're just going to keep on going in that particular direction. The reason I bring up that example is that even though you don't have to know the skill anymore, because your car has that skill, you need to know the competence. And the competence is not look at the tree that I'm about to hit, it's looking at the gap between the trees, or look at how I can avoid that within that. So cadence braking, now obsolete because your car does it, but nevertheless important to have that competence within that. So competencies are the skills, the knowledges and the abilities to be successful. So that's the key kind of component. You use your skills, but the competence allows you to take it through to be successful. I'm going to push on to the workplace health and safety regulations associated with us in the church here. And the first one is that churches are legally required to provide and maintain a safe and a healthy workplace, both for you as leaders or for you as helpers or for you as volunteers, but also for our participants and anybody else that comes to our church service. So we're legally required to provide that safe and healthy workplace. The workplace health and safety regulations require us to make sure that we have safe systems of work, that we use and handle goods and substances safely. And probably one of the little things that you think you don't need to know, but one of the very good practices of Access Church is our storage of chemicals. And some people who have been cleaning or doing work in the church know that our chemicals within the church are in a locked up cupboard, which is where they're required to be. And part of our safe chemical handling is to make sure that the most dangerous chemicals are on the bottom shelf, because there's less chance of spillage and spillage onto a person within that. So we actually have safe systems within our church for handling goods and substances that could be dangerous. We need to provide information, instruction and training and supervision for our workers to make sure that you are safe as you participate in your ministry at the church here. We need to assess risks and implement appropriate measures to manage and control risks. That's risk management. So you do risk management within your particular ministry, and globally over the church we need to do risk management as well. We're required under legislation to report notifiable incidents. We need to investigate incidents that occur within the church and work out ways in which we can make sure that they don't happen in the future. And finally, one that you don't need to worry about, we have to make sure that we provide workers' compensation to our paid employees. 2 years ago, when I did the training, we talked about something called Safe Church. And this is just, again, an intention to try to get us to have a broader definition or understanding of what safety means. So safety under principles and practices, we need to know why we need to act in a certain required manner, and it's not just following the rules. We have to know why we need to do that. So for example, we prefer that no one comes into Access Church and works here alone. Why? Well, you can run through your imagination. It could be a person gets sick, it could be an intrusion by somebody else kind of thing within it. So we prefer you not to be here alone within that. And without going into it, Access has some other rules about who can be here at a particular point in time as well. So knowing not just the rule, but knowing why the rule is there in place is really important. The next thing is our attitude towards safety. So we can always have an attitude that says, well, I'm sorry we have to do this, kids, but Jono says we have to do it. And that's not going to get the right attitude from them or the right response from those. So we need to be positive that we're doing this because we want to have fun together, but we need to stay safe. We need to develop our skills, and we need to undertake and develop effective actions. We need to be well equipped ourselves. So skill development for yourself. And then the competency, I spoke about that before again too. Knowing what the church's mission is all about and how we can support the mission means that you're going to do it in the most productive way to achieve outcomes. And part of this is our safety message. The safety is not just an add-on in our church, it's part of our culture, it's part of our DNA. So on to culture, support the values and beliefs of Access Church. Support the fact that we want this to be a safe place and seen to be a safe place. If a person is visiting our church and they see your ministry and they're acting in an unsafe way, how likely are they wanting to hand over their children to be part of your ministry? So we need to not only be safe and do safe, we need to be seen to be safe as well. In terms of character, we need to maintain our personal standard and our group standard. Now, the personal standard has been defined in the Code of Conduct, but understanding the group standard. We haven't heard so much in the news lately, but if you can think back a little while, there were some local councils that had lost their way in terms of their group standard. And there were people that were accepting gifts. There were people that were using council property for their own purposes. There were people using council money to buy things that were not for the council but for them personally. So the group standard in some of those councils was that this is acceptable sort of behaviour. And what we have to be careful about is that we need to maintain a high standard, not just personal standard, but our group standard, that we do not tolerate these sorts of things within our organisation, within our church. The governance and accountability, important parts in terms of safety. We need to own our responsibility for our group, and we also have to accept the fact that we are accountable. So governance is having good oversight of what's happening in your group. It's not acceptable to say, well, I sent the kids out to play by themselves and I told them not to play roughly. That's not good governance. You have to keep an eye on what's happening and make sure that the appropriate standard is kind of being met. And your accountability, of course, is we are all accountable. We're accountable to God. But in the organisation here, we're accountable ultimately to Jono as our CEO of the organisation. He's our chief officer. Within that, you're accountable to him. So if he says jump, what do you do? Jump. No, he's the ultimate authority within that. So, no, we don't like that comment. The next one is capacity. In terms of our responsibility is to continue to grow, to continue to understand what we need to do to be safe and to keep our organisation safe, to improve our capacity. And finally, to know that there are many resources that are available for you. We have a national website with well over 100 resources that are associated with safety and a whole range of different things. And if you ask the question about you need information about something or you need a form for something, then we can often provide that kind of thing for you. Let's just talk about the implementation responsibility for it. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I'm starting to run out of time. As a leader, A leader in a technical sense has to be 18 years of age or older. If you're under 18 years of age, you can be called an assistant leader. So if you're 16 or over, you can be called an assistant leader. And if you are under 16 years of age in a technical sense, you are a junior leader or a junior assistant, kind of thing within that. Now there's a whole range of practical actions that we need to do within our groups, within our ministries to keep safe. And there's also some expectations that we need to follow that I've been talking about as we go through. I want to run through a list, and I think this is going to be a little bit small on your screen, so I'll read them out. Only as prompters, because if you see something up there and you decide that you need to know more information about that, then you can certainly ask for it. But 2 leaders present. We should always be 2 leaders present, irrespective of the number of children that you have. You should have 2 leaders there, and it's preferable that you have a male and a female. Now, that's not always possible, but 2 leaders present is desirable. You need to be aware of stranger danger. So if you're going on an activity outside and there's a toilet block up there, you just don't assume that everything is fine without checking that out before you send all our kids to go over to that. You need to do approved activities. This is an important one. It is also a legal aspect that your program needs to be approved. And you notice that Jono has asked for information about your program for the year, and you will provide updates at various points in time. And it's up to Jono and the board to decide, well, no, you really can't do, I'm trying to think of something really obscene, but there's some things that you won't be approved of doing, but it's up to the board to approve the activity, and it needs to be approved, otherwise it's not going to be covered by insurance. For some activities, you need to have qualified instructors. So if you're in doubt, Jono or the board will be directing you that to make sure that you have a qualified instructor. You need to know about first food safety. You need to know where the first aid kit is. Where's the first aid kit? Everyone point. Just over there outside the kitchen. But do you know there's also portable ones that are available for you as well. Do you notice in the wall outside the kitchen there's also a defibrillator? Did you notice that? Do you know what a defibrillator is used for? If I'm on the ground and I'm no longer breathing or my heart's no longer beating, have a go. Otherwise, we have some very skilled people in the room here that know how to use it, and it is actually got instructions related to it. You don't go and play with it, because if you take it out of the box there, the alarm will go off. Isn't that right? I think that's one of those within that. But we have a defibrillator, but most importantly to know where the first aid kits are. Need to know about transmittable disease. You've heard for so long about COVID, and I've included COVID every single time, so I can't not mention COVID, at least 3 times COVID within our training here. But there's numerous other transmittable diseases that we need to be careful about, and we need to have good habits in terms of protecting our people for that. Noting that there are attendance roles. You need to complete attendance roles for your group. There's also accident reports and incident reports. And jumping ahead again, you need to know about how to transport children, if that's one of the activities you're going to do. You need to know what's appropriate for communicating to children. You need to be aware of your personal safety. You need to know how to use equipment. And we have a number of people that use equipment such as mowers, such as vacuum cleaners, other equipment that you need to be clear about or understanding about how to use it. We mentioned chemical use and safety and storage before. And the last one there, do a risk assessment for all activities. Now, that's not a written risk assessment, but if something goes wrong and there's an investigation occurs and you get asked the question, did you do a risk assessment? The answer is yes, even if it was a mental one, a mental risk assessment, which simply means that you'd be telling the investigating people, I thought through all the possible problems that were going to kind of occur, and I took these sort of actions, kind of thing within it, but I didn't document the process within that. So a risk assessment for every single activity that we're involved in doing. This is an important one to get through, an emergency evacuation. An emergency is an event, actual or imminent, which endangers or threatens to endanger the life, the property, or the environment, and which requires a significant and a coordinated response. And as you can see there, that's an Australian standard associated with that. I want to just quickly talk about the impact of a fire. If there was a fire within the building here, the greatest chance of being injured is from the smoke. You're aware that smoke is the most dangerous thing. You're more likely to get smoke damage and lung damage than to be damaged by the flames kind of occurring. So our emergency response is based on race. And the race is the first thing we have to do, and the most prominent thing we have to do is to make sure that everyone is out of the building, everyone is safe. So remove people. I did this training with the board members and gave them a couple of examples when our alarms will not go off. There are certain combinations within the building here which the alarm may not be triggered. So if you have an emergency, you may in fact have to go out into the foyer there. And do you know where the button is? If you don't know, have a look on the way out. There's a button there that you can push and that will set off the alarms within the building. So set off the alarm. We are not connected to the fire department directly, so you need to also phone the fire brigade. We have people that have the job of making sure that everyone is evacuated, so this is mostly for a church service. So we have wardens associated with making sure that everyone is evacuated, and for that they know that they will confine or close the doors as they do their inspection. And as a last resort, you think about everyone is out and I think I could have a go at extinguishing the fire. I'm just going to quickly point to you where the extinguishers are in the building. There's one just behind that screen there. That one is suited for electrical sort of fires. There's one out in the foyer, which is suitable for electrical fires. There's one down the back there behind the sound desk, which is suitable for electrical fires. And there's one in the middle outside the kitchen, which is the chemical, which is suitable for wood fires and other sort of general sort of fires. We also have a fire hose, which is just in the foyer out there, and that can be obviously for general putting out of wood type fires or general fires that are non-electrical. We also in the foyer, outside the kitchen, we have a fire blanket, and the fire blanket is used for oil fires or fat fires. Within that, you do not use an extinguisher for those because all you'll do is just spread it all over the place. So you use the fire blanket to put on, and if you're a person that works in the kitchen and you need this more closely explained, we can show you how to use the fire blanket. It has two handles on the back of it. You lift it up and you drop it on top, and then you reach across the stove and turn the power off. So you must remove the form of combustion or the chance of future combustion. So an evacuation needs to be completed within about 3 minutes. And it needs to be completed within about 3 minutes because a fire will double every 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds a fire doubles, and within a couple of minutes the fire is virtually out of control. So when we did our practice with the board members and the people that were attending a training sort of session here, we actually did it in under 3 minutes and got out. If we were doing an evacuation now, you would leave by these doors at the front here, only because that's a funnel sort of arrangement. If you try to get out the front door, we're funneling too many people into a confined space. These are emergency exit doors simply because they are wider than a standard door. However, if you're in the other rooms out there and there's a door in that room leading out, you go out the nearest door. You'll always go out the nearest door. It's just that if we're in the auditorium here, we go out the front here. And important for you to remember, don't just go outside and stop. Keep on going because you need to get to the assembly area. And in a normal sort of service here, we'll see a warden out there. And that warden out there will be talking to you fiercely if you don't come and report to them that you are there or the group is there and you're safely in that sort of place. Just very quickly too, then in the media at the moment is privacy. Very important for us to maintain privacy of our children's records. And the last thing in terms of confidentiality, you mustn't gossip. You mustn't be telling other people about this kid in my group did this today. So confidentiality is important. What you're being asked to do today is to complete a Leaders and Volunteers Emergency Contact and Declaration form. It tells you on the form what they're used for. It's mostly for your safety, but the secondary aspect is that we want you to declare that you are still a fit person to be undertaking the role within that. I'm going to jump over this. I won't go into this in details, but vetting people is an important process that our church needs to take for person suitability. This is just a model that can be used, that a person can use to make sure that you are guaranteeing or checking yourself that you are in fact suitable for ministry, but it's also something that the board could use, for example, to be checking the suitability of our people. So I'm just going to flick through the headings if you can read fast enough or if they're big enough for you to see. Reminding you that you all have to have a blue card if you're working with children, or if you are making decisions about children, or if you're seen as a person of authority or a prominent person within the church. Any of those makes you required to have a blue card. You need to have knowledge. We've talked about that quite a few times. You need to have the right personality. You're not here for your own jollies. In terms of it, you're called by God, and your ministry has to be focused on that. Character, we talked about the code of conduct before. So just skipping over those, if you want to see that in more details, please ask and I can make it available for you. In conclusion, you've been given a code of conduct declaration. There are 2 versions of it. If you happen to have the version, as I said before, that just seems to be directed at children, you can just add "and people," but we have got the other version there, which is a more inclusive version as well. You're also asked to do a leaders and volunteers emergency contact and declaration form. And just finally, if anything about the day is something that you need more information from, I'm just a resource person that's available for you to answer questions. And I'll hand it back to Jono.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Really appreciate your experience and the effort you put into these sessions. Lots of information there. Hey, not a chance you're going to remember it all, but even if you just go away with one development area that you're focusing on, which I just want to improve this or get to know this area a little bit more, if we're all collectively doing that, we make our church a better place. So I don't want to prolong your day any further. Thank you for your attendance. God bless.